Hi everyone, this is Ha and Vivian again. Thanks for joining and watching our show. Today our special guest is Julia. And hello Julia, how are you doing?
Hello.
Hi, I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for inviting me and for having me today. I'm really looking forward to our talk.
Oh, that's our pleasure. We appreciate so much for your time spending with us. We take the spotlight today is for our guest, for you, and we would love to hear more about yourself, your passion, your work, and the journey, how it started for all the great work that you've been doing. So, Julia, would you please take us back to where you, what you're doing, and share with us a bit about yourself? Yeah.
Sure. Yes, I'm currently here a professor of strategic management at the University of Innsbruck in Austria here. My journey hasn't been quite straightforward. So today I'm focusing in my work a lot on strategy, how corporations can develop strategy, and what might be, let's say, new ways that take account of the complexity that organizations are facing today, in the new world they are facing, also in their strategy process. But I have not intended to do this from let's say, childhood. I was initially educated in technical areas, so in construction management, being an engineer there, and later on decided that business aspects might be quite relevant and decided to go back to business school. But I think what has this had a big influence on my way, because early on I saw the potential or the benefits of being able to combine insights from different fields, and even fields that might not be necessarily related to each other from the very beginning. So it was really good to have those different perspectives, even in my education and in my experience. And I think that influenced a lot my work today, and also my work on strategy today, having this benefits of different perspectives, of acknowledging that people who have never worked in your field could bring in something valuable. I think this is really something that influenced my way of working later on. Yes. So, and then I'll just continued my way, a few business schools, spent quite a lot of time abroad in the US, in the UK, and ended up being a professor of strategic management, finally working in this field. So that's my journey in a nutshell, let's say.
Thank you for sharing that, Julia. We would like to bring you back to when you was very young age, about the age of freedom. All right, and back then, when we were a child, we always have a dream of when we grow up, what is that we're gonna become. And my dream was to become a singer, but I did not become a singer for a lot of reasons. And so we would want to know what Julia's dream when you were young, and compared to what you are doing today. So what did you dream back then? What are you gonna become?
Yeah, I have to admit, back then I was dreaming to be either an engineer or an architect. So definitely in the construction field, in the design field, and I have to admit it was really influenced by my family being in this kind of business, especially my dad. So that was really influencing me a lot. That was just what I wanted to do, and that's why I also ended up first in this field. And I have to say, I really loved this field. So I very much liked the way how technical education was set up and engaged in this. So that was, if you would have asked me with 7 years, I would have told you I'm becoming a civil engineer.
Oh, civil engineer. So you went on to study Oh, sorry, Vivian, go ahead.
Yeah. It's like very interesting from civil engineer all the way shifting to strategy. Yeah, it's a very broad spectrum. And you were saying to blend something that is not similar, to combine them to be something like that with the strategic, right? Yeah. So how do you come? And what is the process that you want to decide for strategy?
Let's say it has been after finishing my technical education, I had the feeling that that was not the whole picture. And in order to be able to get, let's say, more insights and being able to understand everything that's going on out there, I also have to have the business knowledge and be able to understand our economy and how businesses are working, even if I'm active in a field of technical aspects. So I decided just go to business school for 4 years, get this education, and then go back to the technical field. And in the end, I never went back. And this was really, let's say, luck, I would say. I met great advisors at the business schools in terms of doing my diploma thesis, my master thesis, my PhD. I got really inspired by my advisors and the people I met at university and loved working together with them in research. I'm still working together with them today. So after all those years, 15, 16 years, I'm still working together with those people. I think they were a big reason why I stayed. And I have to say, I loved doing research. So the way of doing research, being able to work on what excites you, what to work if you think you're curious about a certain field or a question, having this independence to explore fields, working for your own, working in teams, not working for a big corporation, but having the feeling that you can choose your projects and work on them. That was something that I enjoyed very much. And after having this experience in my PhD, I was just not willing to give it up again, I would say.
Yeah. So Julia, when I read a bit about one of the event in your life is the Katrina.
Oh,
you did
yes.
a lot of research and you planned so much that you're gonna go there, study this, and Katrina hit, and you have done something out of the blue for something that unknown, and like very, very worried. I would say I'd be stressed out.
Yes.
How Julia back then were thinking? Would you please share with us a bit about that event?
I was also stressed out, I have to admit. So I went to New Orleans to spend my year abroad there as an exchange student who was expected to spend 1 year abroad because I was studying international business. And as you've said, I did a lot of research because back then, coming from the technical field, it was really about doing research, gathering a lot of information, doing all the analytical steps and plan. So that was really something that I really liked and organized. And then I learned the hard way that within a second, just everything changes. So now we have Frida here.
Hey, Frida! Hello!
So I learned in a second that I had to change everything and my plans wouldn't work out. And I have to say it was a big learning back then. It was really, okay, now I'm facing this complex and situation, and there is no obvious way out. There is no solution and nobody can provide a solution. And I have to react fast because there's a big of time pressure in such a situation when the city is just closed and you can't go back and all your stuff is in there. But you also learn that there can be, at least every situation brings some opportunities that you wouldn't have expected before. And you can, if you're flexible enough to react on them and respond to them, you can benefit even out of them. And I have to admit, I wasn't flexible enough at the very beginning, so I had to learn. But after this event and after this learning, I really realized that sometimes planning is not necessarily, you can't plan everything. And sometimes it's really good to be flexible and see what happens in order to not miss out opportunities. And for me, it was a big learning when I teach strategy to students. I always tell them the story because I think that's just the situation that organizations are facing today. They are not facing situations where they can plan years ahead and rely on the fact that everything will work out based on these plans. They have to face those hurricanes again and again and again and be flexible to react. So it was a huge personal learning. It made me much more flexible and be able to respond to situations that have not been on my agenda or that just popped up suddenly. But it helped me a lot during my life, personally and in my professional life, I would say.
Thank you for
Thank
sharing.
you, Julia. Yeah. So with that event, anything to link with your book open strategy as the path? Yeah.
Yes, I would say in the end, it really brought me into this direction because it's really about our traditional approaches and the traditional way of doing strategy that is very much linked to strategic planning won't work in the world that we are facing today. Organizations need to find ways to be able to respond to those challenges. And open strategy is just something that me and my co-authors that were working on this book for quite some time, that we suggested might help organizations. There might be other ways, but we just believe that in this situation out there and in this complexity and all those developments are going on. I mean, we in Europe are facing all those challenges in the last couple of months that just came up with all those political situations that are going on. So if organizations need to respond to such complexity, we just believe it's not possible for a few people on the top to be able to handle this. So even though they might be great in terms of experience, in terms of education, and very, very clever, we don't believe that they're able to handle this and see all those trends and all those developments, but that we need much more perspectives and inputs, and especially input from non-traditional sources, I would say. So going beyond these small teams that have been responsible for strategy making for a very long time and include fresh perspectives. So we just believe that's one way for organizations to respond to these hurricanes out there.
Julia, the terms in the IT developing world, the open source has been introduced about in the early late 1990s, and then the open strategy also coined 10 years later, about 2008, 2010. I don't remember exactly, and then but. Until then, I don't see really a lot of organizations doing it, and especially for the companies that we've been servicing or we've been working on, strategy is something that sit inside of the box behind the CEO's desk. So that that is so secret to the employees. So and then it's really contradicting with the belief that you and your colleagues are doing. So can you tell us and those leaders who are listening to the conversation why open strategies will help the organizations to excel better, to be more competitive advantage in the market, and can you share with us on that?
Yeah, sure. And you are absolutely right. I mean, it all began with this open source movement, which then began to be adopted in other domains. And we have seen open innovation, we have seen open learning, open government, so different kind of open data, different kind of open movements. And the strategy field was, we would argue, one of the last fields that even began to recognize that openness could help, because of course it's challenging existing power structures and existing roles that have been there over decades, and people have been socialized within the organizations that there are certain roles that are associated with strategy making and some of course, I can understand perfectly that people at the top might be reluctant to give up power, what they might feel. But we argue that open strategy is not necessarily related to giving up power or control, but helps you, what we say, in two very important ways. On one hand, as I've just mentioned, you get all those new ideas, those insights from new fields. And there's a lot of research out there that just shows increased diversity, ideas, more radical ideas, new ideas. So that's the benefit, being able to go beyond established mindsets, beyond these cognitive barriers that we often build up when we are active in a specific field for many years. You have this, that's the way how we do it in our industry. That's the way how we do it in our company. I mean, and if you get new and fresh perspectives, this helps to overcome those barriers. That's the first benefit. And the second everybody is not to see this, and that might even be the more important one, is if you involve people, especially within your corporation, and if they are part of the process, just being able to voice their ideas and suggestions, you get an enormous increase in the understanding of strategy, in the acceptance. People develop a sense of ownership and buy-in, and that's just necessary to be able to develop this passion and emotion that's necessary to engage in the action that is then necessary. Because I always find this is crazy, this number. There are studies that say that up to 90% of strategies fail because they are never implemented or not implemented in a way that would lead to the desired results. And then everybody says it's about communicating not enough, or people are just not willing to implement. But I think if they're not part of the story, it's difficult to mobilize them. If you make them part of the story, they feel it's their own, they internalize it, and they are willing to engage, they are willing to become active. And I very much like this human aspect of open strategy, that you believe your employees are willing to engage in this. They don't see it as a burden or additional work. They love to speak up, and they love to share their ideas and get active. So I think those are the main benefits. But I of course agree that still, especially top managers, sometimes are concerned about engaging in such a process.
I think the word that engagement is very powerful. That made me remember of the works that I've been doing 10 years ago. And then we had a CEO open discussion, and then he asked all of us in all countries to build a strategy for local countries, and then build a business plan for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it was. I don't remember exactly. But then and then gathering information and put it and share it to him, so that they can be included and make it a regional directions, or even global initiative. And it turned out none of the initiative contribute from small countries, like where we too small on the global map in terms of revenue contribution. So the idea was never mentioned. Not just only Vietnam, but other countries also. So it makes, and then the ugly side of that is that we had to gather many people in the countries to talk about, where do we see the companies going. We even talk to our clients, we even talk to our suppliers on how we're going to be able to build a company in 3 years time. And that make us feel really like a wasted of everybody's time. And at the end of the day, why you ask us to do something that you don't even bother to implement, right? So if leaders want to implement the open strategy like this, it has to change from inside of the leaders, in terms of the way of thinking, the way of operating also. So how do you advise leaders to really open and create a channel to absorb ideas, initiatives, and really execute that, to honors the works from the frontline workers, the people in different fields that contribute to the success of the organization. That was Julia.
Thank you, Ha, for sharing this story. I think it perfectly shows one of the aspects that are very, very important in terms of open strategy. You have to do it, you have to take it seriously. So if you as a leader engage in open strategy, if you ask your people to engage, to invest time, to invest resources, you raise expectations. People feel, yeah, finally we have a chance to share our thoughts. We engage in this. And as I've said, people are really happy to do this. They usually do this with quite some energy and engagement. And the worst thing that could happen then is not considering them at all, ignoring them. I mean, it's clear that not every idea, especially if you go very broad, can be considered. But it can be acknowledged. You can say, okay, we were not able to realize this time, but thank you for your effort. So we have seen in our research, it is not necessarily about having your own idea really chosen, but it is about getting feedback, getting some acknowledgement, getting some, if it's just an acknowledgement from the CEO, thank you for participating, I've read it, it's a great idea, but let's talk about it again when we have achieved another milestone or something like this. That's something that is very important. And therefore, I love this example that we have in the book because I think it's so astonishing. We have seen this at Telefonica, the Spanish telecom giant. They have a huge employee social network where they gather ideas digitally. And there it's amazing how the CEO and chairman of Telefonica himself engages in commenting on ideas, liking them, giving people feedback. And at the beginning, people were not even believing that it's him. They thought it's a team. And then in his speeches and in his reactions, they realized he knows about the ideas. He mentions them. He really engaged in them. And they were just happy getting a like back from him. So that was enough. So I think acknowledging the effort from the people, that's an important aspect. And in this story, you also see open strategy needs commitment from the top management. So that's really important. If you don't have a CEO or a manager who is really believing in the concept itself and it's just doing it because everybody is doing it, it won't work. And people will realize. And that's why we say it's really something that needs a mindset shift of leaders. So it really needs leaders who believe in the value of openness.
Wow. I have a question from a few guests in my program, and then they're working in professional services, and they're also big fan of open strategy. And then and then the question is, in the strategy from the top layer, that companies are now in the process of opening and buying more companies, through M&A process, and those normally deemed to be secret trading. So is and because that is cannot be incorporated into an open strategy, and sometimes it makes the people at the front line like Vivian and I, we in the sales position, and then we have to protect our turf. We have to have a strategy to win the market in here, and sometimes it become contradicting, and we don't create the cohesion with what the organization at the top level is planning to expand onto the future and things like that. So is there a fine line between what is a strategy that can be openly shared to the to the employees, and then where information needs to be protected to make sure that and how can we deal with that? How can we deal with that don't waste the resource from the front end people to go now and fighting every day like this?
Yes, that's a very important aspect, and I perfectly agree. There might be situations where information can't be shared, or where information cannot be openly shared from the very beginning. M&A might be some aspects. There is research, though, that shows that going beyond, especially after the deals, going beyond what's sharing information, what's legally required, and voluntary share more information also improves the performance on the stock market. So also transparency helps here. What we have seen is if you carefully engage in open strategy and you design the process carefully, you can even handle high levels, let's say, of secrecy and opening up. So just having sensitive information or being in a sensitive field does not mean that you cannot open up strategy. And this is something that we learned during our research, because we were talking to many different organizations, and finally we realized that we were talking with organizations that are typically seen as the most secretive organizations in the world. So we talked to the NASA, to the US Navy, to even the US intelligence community, so the CIA, and all of them had applied some kind of open strategy approaches. They used ways to involve people without sacrificing sensitive information. So there are many different ways how you can do this, either just including people in the idea generation process, but, and that's very important, let them know from the very beginning you won't be part of refining it or deciding on the strategy, or you won't see the final strategy. You are here in the brainstorming phase. If people know this from the very beginning, that's fine, that's perfect, that's okay. You can break down your questions and just break it down into little pieces and let people work on those pieces of problems so that they don't have the holistic picture necessarily. And what we have seen overall, we even feel that sharing information that would be previously been protected helps, because openness, especially within your organization, helps you to be faster. So the process itself of gathering the information might be a little bit more complex because you have more actors involved. But as you get this buy-in and this commitment, you're much faster in implementation. And today it's typically not so much important if your information goes out, if you are already in a stage where you can implement it, if you have all the organization aligned, because if your competitors learn about it, they have to go through all the layers and in their organizations, they have to communicate it, they need to get approval, they need to engage in realizing it. And until then, you are already there because you have already the entire organization behind you. So sometimes we even say, okay, forget about protecting it. Making use of the speed and get to market fast and have your organization aligned. It's much more important today, especially today where we have all those changes. I mean, it might not even be relevant next year because things are so different that competitors can have all this information out there. So that's really fascinating.
It's good to see the tractions on that, right, Julia? Julia, I have a question. In our life work, we do a lot of change management for our clients. Okay, and the one common thing that I always see as organization out there, regardless of the size, is the people working in silo. And organization has been spending a lot of money finding management consulting organization like us to come and help them to break the silos and to help people to think of the organization as the bigger picture instead of protecting the turf, the pupil, my team, my departments. And then do you think that with open strategy, if we share it up public, where we as a division want to head onto the future, on organization want to head into the future, would that help fixing the silo mindset from the leadership perspective?
Yes,
Yes.
I think that would help. That would help a lot because, as we said, openness does not necessarily only refer to getting externals in, but also getting this openness within organizations, going across layers, going across functions. We have seen those in different organizations. There is a small consultancy firm, IT consultancy firm in Germany. I'm sorry, Frida is destroying something over there. A small IT consultancy firm in Germany, Saxonia, and they were working exactly as you said. They had a lot of independence, the different departments, but that really resulted in those silos. So the different departments were mainly reacting to consumer needs and to their big customers that they had. But they were not necessarily interacting with the other departments. So a lot of silos. This worked out quite well for them until 2008 and 9 when the financial crisis hit because they lost big customers here. And then they realized that they have to do something differently, and the management team and some people get it just together and did some emergency strategy, which was quite successful. And they realized, wait, guys, if we have been successful now, why don't we meet in a bigger circle again 3 times a year and have these implementation periods within? And then the software programmers in this company, they got really kind of annoyed because they realized something is going on. Some people are involved, Why are we not involved? And they realized they need to involve the entire company. So what they did is organizing strategy stand-up meetings in a bi-weekly fashion. So getting together, having people reporting on their ideas very frequently, very often, and they had a large proportion, I think 25% of the entire workforce was always engaging and participating, which is quite huge if you compare it to larger firms. And they realized this really resulted in a way that people were knowing what the others are doing, and they knew they could overcome these silos and engage in a joint direction, which really helped them to become quite successful, which resulted in the fact that they were ultimately bought by one of their big customers and becoming their digital, let's say, hub of innovation within this big organization. So they were very, let's say, so for them, open strategy was really a way to overcome these silos.
Thank you for sharing that. That lead me to the next question. Is a lot of people who listen to this conversation are business leaders also, Julia, and the past couple of years also showing that certain things are not working well in terms of planning, in terms of strategies, in terms of how we see the future, and those business leaders are definitely intrigued to examine potential to make changes, to make implementation, and open source and open strategy seems to be the way to head into the future smoother and less risk for everybody, more engaged workforce. So we will solve a lot of things. But moving from a closed strategy onto an open strategy is like it's a whole transformation process, and it's too huge to look at it. So and and even to think about implementing it. So if there's a baby steps that we need to implement, to make changes now, and use those as a success story, as some to persuade, to make bigger changes ahead, what would be those small baby steps that you can advise our audience to think and to start doing?
Yes, I mean, that's a very good question, because of course, if you are in a corporation that has been set up in a traditional way and is used to setting up strategy based on these traditional processes, you won't be able to transform the entire company within a very short period of time. So what we really say is start gradually, start small. You don't have to jump in with both feet. You can think of one of your divisions within your portfolio, one business unit, one department, where you say, okay, we will start out here, we will engage in open strategy, maybe we will experiment a little bit. I mean, there are many different ways to open up. You don't have to include the entire world and have a large crowd. You can start with small workshops or stand-up meetings. And as a company, ask yourself, why am I opening up? What is the question I want to solve? Do I want to get just new ideas? Do I want to refine a specific business model? And then learn what might work in your situation. A big digital initiative, if you have already platforms in your corporation that you could use, or different workshop formats that you can use, and learn what might work in your specific situation, and then gradually expand it within your organization. Typically, if other divisions see that it's valuable and that it's useful, they want to engage as well, and they say, okay, great, we also want to do something like this, and we also want to be part of this. So really start small, experiment a little bit, and I think that's also important, make sure that you are individually ready. So we always say, okay, start with yourself. I mean, everybody would say diversity is important, transparency is important, but it's not so easy to be comfortable with such a new situation. So make sure to be aware of how open you are already, how you could on purpose try to involve others and speak with people from other fields. So it's an organizational journey, but it's also an individual journey that you have to take towards openness. And both start small, I would say.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Julia, Vivian and I are intrigued on how people are thinking. All right, and we believe that our ability to think naturally is not expanding, but it's shrinking. And so it's best every time that we got a chance to talk to somebody that's good thinkers. It's good for us to examine how those individuals are doing the thinking process, how, and you are named as, you know, one of the top thinkers in the world. That's the one. But when we talk about the conversation that we have today, if we look back at you when you were young age, you want to be a, you know, an engineer type, and then you got into an education, and then you got into the management and strategy, and then you put all the dots together. I think behind that was your ability to think, to connect things, and that excites you, that makes you stay with the program, and that makes you love the works that you do. And it's good for our audience to pick your brain on how Julia actually think about thinking, do about thinking, and implementing thinking. Can you share the secret sauce with us, please?
The secret sauce, that's a big question here. I would say, I mean, what I have learned over the years, and it might have been already in my story, I have changed a little bit from a very rational approach, from believing very much in facts and figures and numbers. I have moved over the years towards an approach that is much more comfortable with, I would say, uncertainty and serendipity and coincidence, and accept that some things might just happen. And I think one important approach or aspect over the years is really that for me more and more I see the importance really of people and the people side, and engage with different people, engage in building relationships with people and in networks of relationships. And that's much more important than engaging too much in the facts and figures and numbers. And so that's something, that's, I think, a shift in approaching things and seeing an importance behind that I could recognize over the years. So let's say a little bit from a very rational approach to a more emotional approach over the years.
But how can you make that shift? For example, like Vivian and my daughter, they are very rational approach. So you know, it's facts, figures, it's right, wrong, numbers, talks, facts, talks, right? And then now you go into emotional approach. Is vague. So it's gray area, it's pink area, it's colorful area, and then besides just black and white. And then moving from you know from the rational approach into the emotional approach requires a big change in your way of operating and thinking too. And that secret needs to, you know, unveil here for the people. If I want to move in the reverse directions also, can you walk us through that process of changing from your end?
Yes, I mean, I wouldn't say that this has been a very, let's say, an approach that I intended to do purposefully. I think it happened. It happened over the years because of my work, because of engaging a lot with different people, because of facing more and more situations, maybe not as extreme as with the Hurricane Katrina, but situations where you just realize there are many situations out there. And I think strategic management is such an area. There is not necessarily a right or wrong. It is not based on only on facts and figures, because ultimately, even if we talk about strategy, those that are enacting strategy, through their actions, through their behavior, those are the people. And the more you engage with this topic, you realize there's always this people side behind, and you just realize that some things can't be explained based on figures and facts. So I think it was a big learning process, not necessarily done intentionally, but just something that happened over the years. Also through those events that happened in our environment. I mean, we had I was definitely shaped by my experience with Katrina, but then also through having a family on my own, having 2 kids during my becoming a professor at the same time. Those are all influences and personal influences, engaging much more with people. And then, of course, the pandemic over the last years has forced us to come back and focus on ourselves more and the people that are around us and how we engage with them. So I think it has been a learning based on many influence factors.
Wow, thanks for sharing. And you mentioned the word learning in here, and to us, that is very important things that need to examine also. There's so much to learn these days, and then we only have 24 hours a day like everybody else, right? And if I waste my time on learning something that irrelevant, and it might be a waste of my time, it also a waste of organizations, a waste of like things that I can contribute back and things like that. So and then the open strategy is where you open the door for everything to coming in, and then you start to invite things to come in for organization to learn things like that. So I want to know how you define what's worth learning and what's worth ignoring, so that we can have a filter in our mind every time that we see information. We say, hey, according to what Julia's advices, this ignore it, this go ahead and learn it. Can you share?
Oh, yeah. I think that's not easy. And from the open perspective, I would really say you never know before. So I wouldn't filter out too much. Even if you talk to people that are completely out of your field, or you read a book that is no business book, but might be, I don't know, philosophy or something else, you never know. So especially we have learned on research that the best contributions come from people usually that have the largest distance, so the largest marginality from the field. And I think that's amazing. So I wouldn't apply such filters, because they are dangerous in terms of just that you're in your information bubble. You just hear what confirms your current view because you have already applied this filter. So you just choose what confirms your existing view of the world, and you don't get these new things in your bubble, I would say. So I would encourage to remove filters. Now, in terms of organization setting up a specific initiative, of course you have to be careful, because you don't want to be burdened with information overload. So here you can really specify your specific question, and then really frame a specific initiative in a way that you really get information that helps for your specific problem, so that you do not have necessarily open-ended questions that also bring you ideas and contributions which are really off topic, and once they are at the table you have to handle them and so on. So you want to clearly specify what you expect from people that are contributing. What should they bring in? What ideas should they bring in? One example is, for example, a strategy community at Ericsson that has evolved just from the initiative from employees, and they are discussing their ideas about the future trends of the organization, but trends in the industry and what might impact the organization. They have framed the entire conversation in this way: what might impact our organization, what might impact our industry. That's the framing, which is quite broad. And I've talked with the moderator, or the guy who is responsible, and he said within, I think, more than 7 years, he only had to delete one post because it was off topic, and all the others are voluntarily accepting that that's the framing of the conversation. So I think, yes, as an organization, you have to find ways to get relevant information. Personally, I would go broad. So
go broad.
just,
Don't filter. So we have a
advocate.
curiosity to examine more things, right? Julia, I will go into the next question, which is also my last question for today to you. Except, and if Vivian has any other questions, we understand your past already, the current works that you do. We always want to know: is there anything exciting that Julia is working on that you want to share with our audience so that we can celebrate in advance with you?
Yes, I mean, it goes a little bit, it's based on what I've already talked about and based also on your questions. I want to understand a little bit more how different personal characteristics really of individuals shape their ability to engage in open strategy. So what are characteristics that make you open? What are that are more open. So I really want to move a little bit from the organizational level to the individual level and say, who are the individuals that enable us to engage in this openness? So understand a little bit more about this open mindset and what is related to this. So this excites me at the moment, and get a little bit more, let's say, from the macro to the very micro, and understand this at an individual level. So that's what I'm working at the moment, and might be with me for the next couple of years, I guess.
I would be so excited to understand more about that because our life works is in human resource industry. So we work with leaders, and then we really intrigue on human behavior and the reason why we're doing what we're doing. So when your research is finished or or about to be released, can you keep Vivian and I on the loop so that we can be update with trends so that we can
sure
yeah.
Sure, love to. I'm happy to do this. Yeah, of course,
Right.
anytime.
Thank you
Yeah, so
very
because
much.
I have similar thinking whether the openness can be taught. Like a lot of people when we say open your mind, be open, but something that can be taught or has to be nature. You have that already, or you can be learning from that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe a second aspect that is also very important for us is really also start a little bit in the phase of business education. So with our students engage in those conversations and discussions so that they maybe go out when they start working and are already those open-minded people and individuals who are comfortable in giving up control and comfortable with those situations and engaging others, and are not scared by this serendipity and by giving up a little bit of control over the process. So I think that's also a very important aspect, engaging in this education.
Yep.
We wish you all the best, Julia, for the work, and we're excited to learn a lot more from the research that you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation today. I'm sorry that I was having Frida sometimes.
So Frida, we love her. We say hello.
I wanted to be part of this.
It's been lovely. Yeah.
Well, engage her to open strategy from early age so that in the future Frida can become an expert in open to any strategies.
Thanks for joining us,
Thanks
Frida.
for joining us. You guys have a wonderful day. And if your family ever travel to our country, please let us know. So Vivian and I will be so happy to take you guys around town, all right?
Oh, I will. I definitely will. Thank you. Thank you. That's very kind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful
Bye.
day.
Thanks
Bye bye.
again. Bye.